Dandavat Pranam devotees, all glories to Srila Gurudev, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Arupanuga Guru Varga, Shri Sachinandan Gaur Hari, my Shishi Radha Vallabhju, and Srimati Radhika's lotus feet. Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tada Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpaturvishya Kripa Shindave Vacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So somehow or another, I don't know how, our part 3 of this series of the pioneering of preaching in Africa, primarily West Africa and Central Africa, got erased. I don't know how. I know it was my fault. So rather than being able to move on to the next section, I was going to repeat as best I can the part 3 information and see if we can solidify it and save it in such a way that that mistake doesn't happen again. So I began yesterday part 3 discussion with a photo that is the original passport photo that I had when I got my passport to leave for Nigeria. So we're talking about over 40 years ago now. So yeah. So of course keeping the personal information hidden, but the original passport and original passport photo, over 40 years ago, that I used to go to Nigeria, my first preaching trip into Africa. I think we had left off in our discussion with the pastime of preaching to the political personalities of Nigeria. I told that I had found a apartment complex in which all of these senators and different level Congress and Parliament members they lived in. This is in a place called Victoria Island. Lagos has many different neighborhood sections, and a very wealthy and exclusive section is called Victoria Island. And I had gone there originally to distribute books like I had been doing in other neighborhoods, but what I found was that it was not as easy because, you know, the houses were very huge, they were gated communities, and, you know, there were dogs and, you know, guards and all these other kinds of things, so I could not as easily access those houses. So I mentioned I had become a little bit flustered, but I did come across this apartment complex, and I thought, well, you know, this might work because, you know, it didn't seem to be as daunting as trying to go house to house. But it was also a gated community and you needed a pass to get in. So I watched a couple of cars go in, and obviously the gate opens and then there's a little bit of time before it closes again. So I took the advantage to piggyback on one of the cars that was going in after it had gotten in. And that's how I got into the complex. As I mentioned, I noticed on the back of that vehicle that there was a government insignia indicating that this person was a member of parliament. And so I thought, well, maybe it's a wealthy section of town. Maybe he just personally lived in an apartment there because he's from like one of the other states, maybe Ogun State or Owerri, or one of the other places, and that he was temporarily residing, obviously, in Lagos for whatever government duties he had. But as I looked around, all the cars had him. So then I realized, oh, this is the complex for the parliament officials to stay in. And I'm not going to repeat the story because I've already told it in section 2, but we picked up from there. Our Sankirtan activities stayed pretty steady in Lagos. And we were going to different neighborhoods, and, you know, it was, very exciting. I, kind of, enjoyed being out and about and going to all these different places. We had concluded now that perhaps we didn't have a temple yet, so we weren't making devotees really in the sense of having them come and live with us. Only Dr. Martin was on a steadily basis coming and being in our association. But we thought we could have other devotees come now. They would have to obviously be male devotees because we didn't have facility for co-ed living at that time. So we wrote to Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and he sent one devotee named Hari Murari Prabhu. So Hari Murari was a Pakka Brahmachari. He had been living Brahmachari life. He was a Harinam disciple of Al Srila Prabhupada, who had been living a Brahmachari life for many, many years. And the hallmark quality of Hari Murari, well, two things. One was he was extremely introverted. If you knew Hari Murari, he was, he's very open and friendly and so forth, but he wasn't an outgoing person per se. And secondly, he was, what should I say, obsessive, compulsive, neat. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad quality. Hari Murari, if he folded his bedding in the morning, every corner of the bedding would be exact. And you couldn't just roll it up or fold it up. It had to be folded in such a way that each of the corners matched, and the larger one would be on the bottom, then the next section. And so he was to the extreme, neat, very organized, just very meticulous like that. So I was excited that he was going to be coming because, obviously we had a relationship from staying in the restaurant in DC, and I felt now we would have more of a expanded company, myself, Dr. Martin, and now one of our peer group to be there. And so I was looking forward to it very much. In the meantime, myself and Dr. Martin, we continued to go out on Sankirtan. Then we finally got word that, Hari's ticket was there, he got his flight, and he'd be arriving on this day. So our driver, Tahiro, was scheduled to take me to the airport to go and pick him up. Now, Dr. Martin, I think, was still working at that time, so he did not go. So Tahiro came, and we went downtown. I think I did a little bit of book distribution before, and I checked our mailbox, which I normally did, and then I had some other errands to run downtown. But in the interim, Hari Murari Prabhu's flight was coming in, so we decided we'll go to the airport, and though it's going to be a little bit to go to the airport and come back, we're going to have to do that. So we drove out to the airport, we picked up Hari Murari. Of course, we went through the kind of ecstatic greeting of each other. I was very happy, and I felt a kind of, wow, I'll get to show him how great preaching has been in Africa, because in America, obviously, preaching was vastly different. You couldn't just do straight preaching, pretty much. There was always some kind of, cloak and dagger mechanism to distribute books and all of that. But here, it was completely free. You could Dodi Kirta Tilak, straight preaching, and we were distributing boxes of books at a time. So I knew he would be really, really enthused and ecstatic. So we picked him up from the airport, drove back downtown for me to run some errands that I was tasked to do by Shripad Brahmananda Maharaj at that time, and Prabhu later on. So we went back downtown. I went back and checked the post office box again and did grab some things out of there. The reason we always checked that was because we were doing the Friends of Krishna program, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and we would get the checks and the sort of responses to joining via the post office box. So we went down there, checked that. I did some other things that I was tasked to do down there. And then we're driving back. We're in a Daihatsu. And Hari Murari was sitting there. I'm telling him this is our Sankirtan spot, how great it is, and how wonderful it is, how many books we distribute, how big of a crowd we get. So we begin driving back, and suddenly we hear something that I've heard before. Ole, ole, ole. So it's not a Spanish term, ole. Here, ole means thief in Nigeria. And we saw a gentleman running from the marketplace, which was behind the post office, was running kind of at full speed and being chased by a huge crowd. And as he ran and passed people, they would join in the chase. So I kind of knew what the events coming were. And we were stuck because of the traffic, crowd, everything else. We could not maneuver. So he ran, and literally ran at one point as he started to be attacked by the crowd. He ran and actually ran into our vehicle, and on the windshield, he was leaning across it. And Tahiro reached out of the driver's side and was trying to push him off so we could move the car. So the car didn't get overrun. Daihatsu's a pretty small van, a pretty lightweight. So it didn't get overrun. He's trying to push him off. and the crowd was beating him mercifully. So I started to yell out, "Stop, stop, stop," I guess just as a reaction. And it didn't have any effect, obviously. So Harikatha's introduction to Nigeria, with all the hype and everything that we had been giving it about the glories of its preaching and everything, was this watching a thief who had stolen, we came to find out, flashlight batteries, beat to death, literally, and then set on fire. Because what they would do is, after you were beaten, they would take tires which were abandoned, laying around, here and there under the bridge and whatnot, and then they would take gasoline and, So, Harikatha didn't say anything. He kind of, I guess, just digested it. And I was telling him, this is one of the things that does happen here. And, I know this was 1979, and I'm quite sure the dynamics have changed vastly since then. But this is just one of the things that used to go on. And so we kind of talked about it a little while, but then I didn't want to dwell on it because I wanted to keep the energy around the great things that were going on there, like the preaching and the excitement of being able to, meet so many people who were genuinely interested in Krishna consciousness. So we got back to the building, and me and Harikatha stayed in the same room. Brahmananda had his room, myself, Harikatha had another room. And so then we started our, sojourn onto preaching now as a trio with Bhakti Martin and our driver Tahiro. So I remember one day we also decided, rather than to go to our normal Sankirtan spot, which was downtown. I used to go to various places by myself, but usually as a group we went out and went downtown to the post office area. But that day I had to pick up some books. We had shipments of books always coming in from the Books of Africa program. So Brahmananda gave us the bill of receipt or lading, whatever it is, to pick up those books. So we decided to do the Sankirtan down by Apapa Wharf, which is where the books came in. So, we went down there, we were doing Sankirtan, we had already picked up the books, and we had them in the back of the Daihatsu, and we had some other books that we had taken out with us, and we had those open boxes to distribute. So we're distributing books, and as we're distributing books, two police officers come over. And I'm giving, as I normally did, I would give a little talk. And the talk would engender a crowd. And then we would, as I said, say, well, you can find all the answers in the book. And that would generate the book sales. So I think what happened was the police, they were standing and they're watching the whole thing. Obviously heard my voice and knew that I wasn't from Nigeria. And watched as we started collecting, quite a bit of naira or money. And afterwards came over and approached us and actually said, listen, I need to see some identification. So it was the rule that we had that we never took our passports out with us, because if your passport got lost, that was a pretty serious thing. So you didn't either want to get pickpocketed or something, or just lose it on your own, or, sometimes, like this case, the police officers could have taken the passport and tried to bribe us right on the spot. So Brahmananda told us, don't take your passports when you go out. So we didn't. So we were trying to explain to the officers that we were missionaries there, kind of from a, spiritual society, and that we didn't have an identification with us, but we did have it back at our base. And so the police officers will know, you're going to have to go downtown and go to jail. Now, Bhakti Martin is a very, very, when it comes to righteousness and things of honor, he is very gung-ho and very straightforward. So he was immediately coming to our defense saying, no, we're missionaries and we're doing missionary work. And he kind of began challenging them on, what do you really want? What are you trying to do? And so then they became a little agitated and everything. So then, I pushed forward and said, well, listen, if you come back to our base, we can show you our identification. We can show you, where we stay, this and that. So they agreed, and we got in the Daihatsu, and they got in a Jeep, and they followed us back to Serdalere and to the flat. And when we got there, we walked in and we told Brahmananda what was happening. And sure enough, less than 2 seconds later, these two officers came up the stairs. And Brahmananda, he opened the door, and Brahmananda is a pretty imposing figure for those who know him. He's really large. And of course, I don't want to introduce this factor as anything negative, but Brahmananda being in a white body, there was maybe a little more of a hesitation on the part of those officers, because the identification of Americans, foreigners, and white bodies, it could be a little more challenging, I guess, in their eyes. So what happened was Brahmananda told them, yeah, these are missionaries, we're a missionary group, and so forth and so on. So the police, they did say, well, listen, we needed to see some ID. They don't have identification. We don't know really who you are, etc. So at that point, we went back and we got our passports and we showed them the passports but didn't give them to them. Then Brahmananda said, listen, we're only selling books. In fact, I can give you some. So Brahmananda went back, got a couple of small books, and he gave them the small books. And of course, they opened the books, and inside there was some naira for each person. So Bhakta Martin, when he saw that, he really didn't like it. He began to say, no, we don't have to give them anything. They're wrong. They're just trying to extort money, etc., etc. So Brahmananda was trying to calm him down, kind of, and at the same time, pacify these two officers and go ahead and let them go about their business. So long story short, that is what happened. They ended up going away. They had a couple of small books with spiritual benefit, and I guess they were pacified by whatever little bit of naira was given. So then Brahmananda started explaining to Bhakta Martin that, listen, it looks like something not good. But when you think of the overall mission which we've come to do, we've come to distribute a very transcendental, powerful mission on behalf of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And sometimes in order to accomplish that mission, we have to do the needful, right? Something that always appear to be exactly right according to material, right, wrong, righteous, unrighteous. But the transcendental nature of the mission has to be looked at as the more important thing. So I know Dr. Martin wrestled with that for a couple of days, because his idea was if something is spiritual, it should also be right. So, of course, the material world doesn't always accommodate that. So there was a little bit of tension for a little while regarding that, but the absorption in the amount of preaching and the things that were going on, and I believe the extreme mercy of Srila Prabhupada, our Guru Varga, and Sriman Mahaprabhu kind of overshadowed anything that could become so disruptive that it would stop the preaching. So, we went right back out downtown and other places, and we continued our preaching. And then a few other stories to tell regarding that. So Hari Murari's now become a little acclimated. He's become acclimated to the menu, the food menu, because it's not like what we were experiencing, as I mentioned before, at the Govinda's restaurant. But, Bhakta Martin actually was pretty good cook. And whenever he would come over to cook, then, whatever dishes were made, they were made nicely. So, and then every now and then we'd have, treats, obviously. And as I mentioned, whenever we go out preaching, especially if we were doing life membership, which was to go to any of the Indian families' houses, we were eating pretty sumptuously. Whatever family we went to, they always made like a, huge amount of prasadam. And, Brahmananda would have us offer it and the whole thing. So anyway, Hari Murari and myself, we would get up around, 3 o'clock, between 3 and 3:30 every morning. Mangal Arati was at 5. So we'd get up early to try to chant our rounds and everything. And a lot of times also it was just really hot. You couldn't sleep well. So we would just get up. So this one morning, we got up and we were chanting, and all of a sudden we heard like a lot of kind of commotion downstairs. So here I should tell that each of the houses, even though these were not very wealthy places, but the landlords generally that own those apartments or own those flats hired Sudanese or Somali gate guards. And these Somali gate guards, they, generally all stayed in a group. They each were guarding one house, but it was on that same block. And they would all get together to eat together. They would make salat or make their prayers together and generally socialize together and everything. And then at night, they would settle down at each of the houses, either inside or outside the gate, as gate guards. Now, each of the complexes normally also had a quarters on the back, which was usually one room with a little bathroom area and a little cooking area. And that's generally was meant for them to stay. But like I said, they would never stay back there. They always stay at the front of the gate. So this morning we heard a lot of commotion and things, and we just were wondering, well, what's going on? So we decided, we're not going downstairs. It was still obviously very dark. So all of the different Somali guards had gathered around our flat, and we were like, well, what's going on? So right before it was time to have class or anything, the daylight had started to appear and everything, I decided I was going to go downstairs and just kind of find out what was going on. So the Punjabi gentleman whom I mentioned in video 1, he had come out. He was also wondering what's going on and so forth and so on. Brahmananda came out. He was standing on the balcony area with Hari Murari. So I went and I asked, well, what's happening? And I asked our driver, Tahiro, because Tahiro had showed up by then. And he asked them, what's going on and so forth and so on. So it turns out the dog, who was our gatekeeper's, I guess, pet dog, was missing. So, they were all looking for the dog, and, it seemed like a pretty traumatic event. So I was thinking, well, a dog is a dog. The dog might have just ran off. He might have just been running around the neighborhood or something else. So anyways, they began looking for the dog, and I think they decided to go and check the quarters, because sometimes they kept things in the quarters, and they decided to go back there and check. Now, before I get to this next part of the story, I want to give a little bit of a backdrop about myself. And why? Because you'll find that it's pertinent to what I saw when I got back there. So while I was on the police department, we were living in Maryland. And of course, in an urban area, you very, very seldom see snakes. I mean, every now and then there may be a garden snake or something. But anyway, at my house, I had never seen a snake the entire time I've been there. And I had been there, 7, 8 years or whatever I bought that house. And I had never seen a snake there. So anyway, I'm coming home from work one day. We had company, and my wife had called me and told me we had visitors. Actually, it was my godbrother, Sanatan Prabhu, and his good wife, Premavati. They were there, and I was, I was on my way home. I get to the front of my steps, and I'm about to go up, and I look, and I see, it almost looked like the step itself had moved. So I stepped back to look again closely, and I didn't see anything. So then I got ready to go up the stairs again, and a little grayish colored snake, I don't know what kind of snake it was. I don't think, now living in Florida where I've seen a number of snakes and can distinguish between poisonous ones and not, this was obviously not a poisonous snake, maybe a garden snake or something. But anyway, it came out on the stairs. So I had told my wife to open the door, to crack the door for me. She did that, and she sat back down, they're talking and everything. And I decided I'm not stepping on this step with the snake because the snake wasn't moving. So I took a running jump and jumped up to the top of the little landing right in front of my door. But somehow or another, I kind of pulled a calf muscle or something. So I just kind of crashed through my front door, kind of somersaulted into the living room, and in a fit of laughter and pain, I'm trying to explain what's going on, because my wife is now like, what in the devil is going on here, right? And she's asking, are you okay? You okay? And my godbrother and them, they're just kind of looking in shock, right? So I'm trying to explain that I've seen a snake outside. So, of course, then everybody breaks into laughter and so forth and so on. Now, mind you, I'm working a job where I've been in a shootout, had fights I remember once on a crowded bus with a guy with a butcher knife. So I've been through pretty harrowing things. But this garden snake, somehow or another, I just don't do snakes. Maybe that was the bottom line. I don't know if it's from a previous life or whatever it is. Somehow or another, living in Florida here now, I've made the big adjustment and no big deal, right? But anyways, now back to the story in Nigeria. So we go to the back quarters, which is the actual residence of these gate guards, and we check the inside. And when we open the door to that back area quarters, there's a python in there, and the python is already eating the dog and is digesting. So for me, of course, that was like, I'm not going to even try to mentally digest this right now, right? So I'm in kind of a shock, right? And of course, I took, a bunch of steps backwards, because I don't know how pythons operate at that point, right? So Tahiro is, he's holding me, no, kind of don't worry about it. He's eating. So once pythons eat, they kind of get lazy and so forth, so on. So anyways, the gate guards then start trying to kill, I guess, the python. You know, you can't save the dog at this point. So I'm telling them, don't kill it in that room there, obviously, right? So then they grab it and what have you, and it's, you know, moving very slowly. But they take it out, and I guess they take it out into the, you know, a more wooded area or something and decide to kill it. So I went back up and I told Brahmananda and Hari the whole story. Brahmananda just goes back and says, okay, get ready for Bhagavatam class, right? And Hari Murari, his look on his face is, now after the incident downtown by the post office with the thief, you know, and then the snake incident, Hari Murari, you know, he's reassessing this whole enthusiasm I guess he had to come preaching in Africa. But anyways, so, you know, after that incident, you know, we kind of went back out, went preaching again. Everything is going fine. And, you know, things are developing and we're all very, very happy. So now moving forward, we one day come back from Sankirtan and Brahmananda wants to speak to us. So Brahmananda sits us down and tells us that Mr. Gidwani, who was the owner of Sun Factory, the person who owned that flat we were staying in, is giving up his lease on that flat, right? He's moving his workers, I guess, somewhere else or something, but they don't really have accommodation for us in that new place. So Mr. Gidwani is a very nice gentleman, and he was going to give us a donation to help us, you know, try to work things out. But we had about 2 weeks to make an adjustment because we were no longer going to have a place to stay, literally. So we didn't want to stop the flow of Sankirtan because what would be the point of that? So we continued our morning programs, continued going on Sankirtan, but we would also take some time out, not from the Sankirtan and everything, but afterwards, to try to look at places, get ideas, appeal to other members in the life member community and other things, and just nothing was working out. So it came down to about 2 days left for us to make a decision. We had started arranging all the books, to move all the books and everything. We didn't have much personal packing to do. So we were deciding what we were going to do. I remember we had actually started loading up the larger of the 2 vans that we had and started, preparing what we were going to do. So finally, Brahmananda said, listen, I don't see any other recourse, so we can make this an adventure. And the adventure was we would all live in the vans and we would just travel, preach, and distribute books. So we would actually live in the vans. That was the idea coming. So we both kind of digested that, me, Hari Murari, and I think Dr. Martin was at this point, I have to get fact checked on this. Really, he was really considering just giving up his job at that point and being full-time. I think this is around the time that was going to happen. So anyway, we had concluded that that was going to be our strategy. We were going to live in the vans, travel and preach out of the vans, and that was going to be it. That very evening, one doctor and his daughter came. Now, I cannot remember if they were from South India or Sri Lanka. I'm not, that also I have to fact check, but they came to the flat and, they sat down and they spoke to Brahmananda and we were there. And they mentioned that his daughter had just graduated recently from medical school and he was already a doctor. And they had acquired a pretty large building in another section of Lagos called Ilupeju. And that, they had heard about our plight and they wanted to know if we wanted to share the building. So, of course, Brahmananda said, well, what would that entail? No, nothing. That's our donation. In other words, they were going to donate that part of the building to us, and that's how they were going to do some savor. So Brahmananda was ecstatic, and, all of us were thinking, wow, just look at the mercy of Mahaprabhu. Look at Srila Prabhupada looking over us, that we were willing to get in a van and just travel place to place and preach. And at the last minute, the 11th hour, he sends this wonderful family and they agreed to give us essentially a part of a building. Now, the amazing thing about that was not only was it going to be accommodation, but now we would actually have a place to hold programs, have our first kind of temple facility, everything else. So, of course, the next day we went, we looked at the building, and it was sizable. It was pretty large. The actual doctor and his daughter, they took the smaller half because they were running just like a clinic, right? Like an outpatient clinic sort of thing. But this building formerly had been a medical building, and it was equipped with rooms and, you know, operating rooms, the whole nine. So we took that bigger section. And we went in, and I remember we did a thorough cleaning, and we did kirtan, but all of it was on the first floor. We had a second floor which was available to us, but we never ventured up there because at that time we had no need. There weren't that many of us. And so we just wanted to immediately move and get going, and we didn't want to interrupt our preaching. So we cleaned out the first floor, did a bunch of Harinam in there and everything else to purify the atmosphere. We move in. Dr. Martin has moved in with us at this point. And now with our preaching activities, we're starting to make devotees. And so, you know, those devotees, we're allowing them to come and join. I remember, I think the first person that started coming around, he was a radio personality. And I remember he ended up getting the initiated name Shruti Das. I cannot remember, and I'm sure Ishwar Prabhu or Pujapa Shanta Maharaj remember what his name was before that. But himself, Om Kara Prabhu, who is now Ajay Krishna Prabhu in the UK. We had Bhakta Martin. And of course, Ishwar Prabhu, he also came very in that first group as well. And who else? Chandrasekhar Prabhu. And Chandrasekhar is also a memorable personality for me because we had two things in common. One was that he was from the Yoruba tribe. Ishwar was as well. But Chandrasekhar was from the Yoruba tribe, and he knew about bata drumming, which was something that I had been studying back in the States and was part of one of my percussion studies and everything. So the bata drumming originally comes from Nigeria. So he knew about that. He knew where I could go to see it, which was a place called Badagry, which was closest to us. There are several places, but Badagry was closest to Lagos. So he was willing to take me there to see that. And secondly, he was a national champion in Nigeria in Shotokan Karate. So of course I had started my martial arts studies in Shotokan also. So I was like, wow, you know, so we shared this in common. We used to talk about it and even practice together sometimes. So it was very, very wonderful that we had this small grouping. Now, in addition to this, since we had a facility, we felt now we could start to have, you know, the wives and other Grahasta couples start to come now because we had facility, right? Now, we had kind of started utilizing the rooms on the first floor. Brahmananda Prabhu, of course, had his own room. We decided to make a kind of bookshop office out of one room. Then, you know, the other men, we were sharing the other rooms that were there, but we had the whole upstairs, which we hadn't even ventured into yet. So we wrote to Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and told him we had acquired a place and, you know, how the place was and so forth and so on. So he, at that point, you know, said, oh, great. So then, you know, my former wife, another Grahasta couple, Premavati came at that time, Srinath Chakravarti Prabhu, Bhuta Bhavan Prabhu, who now lives here in Alachua, came. So we had a whole nother influx of devotees coming from the West, and we were making devotees at that time in Nigeria. So now everything became very lively and active now that we started having, you know, this devotee collective. Now, I have to tell the story of the second floor. The second floor of that building was a mystery up until this point because we had not ventured up there. There was no need. But now that the other devotees had arrived, we did not want that the Grahasta families had to stay down with the brahmacharis and everything. So we were going to use the upstairs for the Grahasta families, and downstairs would be the brahmacharis, the bookstore, etc., etc. So we went upstairs. We didn't keep the lights on at that time upstairs because obviously that would save electricity, everything. So we didn't have it turned on. So we went up there, and I believe we had candles, maybe flashlights or something, and we began looking around in the rooms. Now, upstairs was as big as the downstairs. So we thought, oh, this is like great, huge facility. You know, each Grahasta family could have their own room and, you know, everything. And so we were looking around and, you know, looking at everything. Now it was dark, so we could not really see very clearly. But one of the things we did notice was that all of the medical equipment was still there. You know, the gurneys and, you know, cabinets and all that. So we were like, well, we neither want this stuff nor do we need it, so we need to find a way to get rid of it. So we told Brahmananda, you know, that we had seen that and that needs to be gotten rid of. So he arranged through the doctor to get that stuff out of there. And I guess it was being donated to other clinics and stuff like that. So once the place was cleared out, we went back up, and now we're checking each of the rooms, and we're going to clean them and everything. We've got our buckets and water. We're about to clean things. So one of the Mataji's noticed, I think first, I don't remember who, but somebody said, "Is that blood?" So we were thinking, well, this place has not been in use for, I don't know how long. So, what do you mean blood? So then we looked closely, and we started to see blood stains in different places. So we were like, okay, I'm not sure about this. So we didn't touch anything. We went back downstairs. We told Brahmananda what we found. We called the doctor in and spoke to the doctor. And the doctor said, Swamiji, one thing I didn't really mention, very inauspicious, Amangal. They used to do abortion in that place upstairs. So we were like, at that, it's like everybody's heart dropped. And we were like, well, that place is probably haunted. It's just, we couldn't fathom, the nature of, what had gone on up there, right? So it was a big decision. Well, what do? We have this facility, and we have one or two things: just to leave it alone and just close it off like it doesn't exist, right? But Brahmananda, even then, he said, listen, we need to do kirtan, like have a little kind of fire sacrifice or something in the downstairs, just to purify the atmosphere of the whole place. And we'll do kirtan throughout the whole building, even upstairs. So then we thought, well, listen, if we're going to do all of these measures, right, and we can get the place cleaned up, then, we'll have to think, well, listen, to utilize this place for preaching will purify it. And that's the attitude we took. So after we did kirtan, several times, and Narsinga prayers and various things, and we had cleaned the place up, we had burned a bunch of incense up there, and I believe we'd also done like a small homa, right? Because, none of us were really doing yajnas and things at that time. We had all new devotees pretty much. So I think Brahmananda did some small yajna perhaps. And we certainly chanted a bunch and everything up there. And once we had cleaned out the rooms, then, the two Grahasta couples who were there, we each took one of the rooms that was up there. And, we started. We said, we're going to bite the bullet. And we're going to go ahead and continue the preaching and not let anything deter us. Srinath and Premavati Didi, my former wife, everybody was very fired up to go out and continue preaching. So at that point, we started to realize that we were going to have to make some other adjustments. So I mentioned already in volume 2 that there were rolling blackouts. This is a common thing, like in India, like in a lot of places. In Nigeria, there was rolling blackouts, but there was a generator that would kick on, etc., etc. So whenever the generator would kick on, things were fine. But every now and then, we would run into situations where, it would get dark and the generator didn't kick on immediately, either because there was a lack of gasoline or petrol or whatever. So it'd be burning hot. And we would crack the windows upstairs with the idea that we would get a breeze. So when we would crack the windows, we would get this mosquitoes from hell, literally. These mosquitoes, it's almost like they got together, made a plan and said, we have a whole new crew here, and we're going to show them who's boss. So these mosquitoes, they would come in, and even before they bite you, the humming sound that they made was like extreme. It didn't seem like regular mosquitoes that only you start to hear them buzzing when they get close to your ear. It was almost like as soon as they came in the window, they buzzed to let you know we're here and we're coming for you. So I'm being a little exaggerating now, obviously. But anyways, it was horrible. So then we would try to close the window, but it would get extremely hot, and now these mosquitoes were trapped inside. Second thing, there were rats that were, they range from rat size to almost the size of cats, it seemed like. I'm being extreme again. But anyway, these rats, somehow or another, they would run all over, and they would come up on the ledge of the windows, and they would try to get in, right? And so we always had to keep the window cracked just enough that they couldn't get under it, right? And at the same time, try to deal with getting some kind of breeze because of the extreme heat. So anyways, battling the mosquitoes and the rats, that was one thing, right? But on the weekends, the next phenomenon was that right around 10 o'clock at night, everything, you know, just as devotees mostly are getting into kind of a deeper sleep, because, you know, we take rest around 9:30, whatever, because we're going to Mangal Arti. This huge electrified juju band would start playing, because the place across from us was like a facility that was rented by wealthier people to have parties, weddings, parties, etc. So around 10 o'clock, all the way to about 5 o'clock in the morning, just after Mangal Arti, the juju music would go on. I don't know if anybody knows what juju music sounds like. It's pretty far out. But very famous performers would perform there as well, like King Sunny Ade and others. And so you would hear all this juju music, and every now and then I would brave looking out the window to look over and kind of see what was going on. And I remember seeing that you could see, first of all of the cars, like these super expensive cars, and you would see all the people, they were dressed to the nines. They all had on these agbada. Agbada is like a dress in Nigeria for men that's really regal. And the women would have on all of this very fancy lace with sequins, and they had on super expensive jewelry. And whenever the musicians would play, one of the things they would do is they would get up and they would dance, and while they were dancing, they would take money and they would wipe it. The musicians would be playing very hard, so they'd be sweating, so they would stick the money on their foreheads and would stick to their forehead. So anyways, these were all the kind of things that we were witnessing at the same time trying to practice sadhana. So that means we'd have to get back to sleep and get up in the morning for Mangal Arti. So by this time, we had a kind of very normal temple activity going on. We were regularly going on Sankirtan and regularly coming back and having classes. And as I mentioned before, we had started a Sunday program. Now, one of the things that was very important about the Sunday program was that all the book distribution that we did meant that the Sunday program would be kind of healthy, kind of, crowded. And the second thing was that, as I mentioned before, when people in Nigeria bought a book, they went home and they read that book, they would actually highlight or underline certain sections of the book, and when they came to the Sunday program and it was time for questions and answers, they would literally pull out the book, quote from that underlined or highlighted section and ask you questions. So if you yourself were not studying and reading, you would have found yourself very embarrassed, right, if you couldn't answer the questions, right? I'm looking for, oh, here it is. So this is a magazine that was published by one of our Friends of Krishna members. It was called The Beacon. I'm going to have to cover my face here to show you. But this was The Beacon magazine. And he used to publish this magazine in Nigeria. His name was Isaac Mba. And he was a journalist, and this was his magazine, and he had become, a devotee and a friend of Krishna. And so he had a whole magazine dedicated to Krishna consciousness. And he had taken some pictures of the temple. Now, you're not going to be able to see them very well. This magazine is over 40 years old. But if you look at this picture at the bottom, I was giving a Sunday feast class, and you can see, you get a general idea. And this was a pretty big room, so you only see in the front of the crowd, but it's a huge crowd there, and we're just about to give this Sunday feast lecture. This is Ishwara Prabhu. He was there by the time playing Mridanga also, and that's myself obviously seated down, and this is our crowd here. The gentleman in the middle here, I'm trying to remember his name, but he was one of our first Grahastha family Friends of Krishna members, and we had gone to his house and set up an altar for him, and here's a picture of him with his family and his kids and everything, and they used to chant every single day, and they used to have their altar, and they would do arati and everything every day. So it was a very successful preaching program, as I mentioned, and things were going extremely well. So here's another, I guess if you could see it a little bit, kind of a picture of what the temple room looked like, and kind of the Sunday feast crowd and so forth and so on. So things were going pretty good, and we started to get people to move in, as I mentioned before, and we also had the devotees now who had come from America and were now staying as well. So after we had gotten everything going, we were having a regular morning program as well. So one of the things, another interesting story here is that Brahmananda Prabhu, he very much wanted devotees to develop in speaking and preaching. So he would very rarely give the Srimad Bhagavatam class, but he would have the devotees give the Srimad Bhagavatam class. So primarily, Srinath Chakravarti Prabhu, myself, Abhuta Bhavan Prabhu would give class, pretty regularly. And every now and then, we would have one of the newer devotees who had been around, Ishwar Prabhu, of course, Bhakta Martin, of course. They were also giving class. And we had one devotee who was relatively new, and he was a great manager. I mean, really great manager in terms of organizing and everything. So he was put in charge of the gift shop and bookstore. And he was also one of the ones, I think, who organized the mailings for the Friends of Krishna Club and all of that. His name was Jonathan, Bhakta Jonathan. Fact check me, Shantamaraj, but Bhakta Jonathan, I think, was his name. Bhakta Johnson or Bhakta Jonathan? Bhakta Johnson, perhaps. But anyways, we elected one morning to have him give class, right? Because he was doing so much work, he was so dedicated, and we thought, yes, you should give a class. Everybody's here, we're all supporting you, and, so we can make any corrections to anything that happened. So he studied. I mean, I guess he went in and studied the verse and everything, and he was prepared to give class the next morning. So anyway, the next morning we come out, we're all ready for Bhagavatam class. Jaya Radha Madhava. Right? So everything very nice. So he starts to give class. He's going on. He's mostly speaking, in English. And he's making very good points. Everything is very nice, very apropos to the verse. And so then he begins to quote one verse in Sanskrit, right? So he closes his eyes, everything, and then he says, Vishnu Vigada Viganu. Krishna is the cause of all causes. So, we had been, listening pretty attentively to class, but then when we heard that, Vishnu Vigada Viganu. So I looked at Srinath looked at me, because me and Srinath, we were very much into studying verses and, these kind of things. Srinath Prabhu was very, much steeped in study and all those sort of things as well. So we looked at each other, and we looked also, Ishar and all others, and we're like, what did he say? So then, we asked, Prabhu, what verse you're quoting? Vishnu Vigada Viganu. Krishna's the cause of all causes. So, nobody was laughing or anything, but everybody was like, well, Prabhu, hold on. Where's the verse from? Right? So we can get, some sensibility. We knew where the verse was from. It's Brahma Samhita verse, actually. Right? So, but he was like, well, Premavati Didi's on, and she told me his name was Johnson. Right? Bhakta Johnson. So, anyway, so then we were like, okay, well, what is the verse? Right? So he repeated again. So he said, well, no, Prabhu, you're thinking, Sava Karana Karanam. Krishna is the cause of all causes. Ishwarapano Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Radha Govinda. Sava Karana Karanam is the verse, right? So then he, humbly accepted the correction and everything. So another thing was that Brahmananda, like I said, he wanted everyone to speak. He wanted everyone to give class. So the only person who would never give class was Hari Murari Prabhu, because I mentioned Hari Murari was introverted somewhat, and it just wasn't his thing to give class. But Brahmananda didn't want to hear that. He was like, he's a brahmachari, Harinam disciple of Srila Prabhupada, which means he's a little senior, like Bhutta Bhavan Prabhu was senior to us because he's Prabhupada disciple. And so, no, I want him to give class. So, went back and forth a couple of times, and Hari would end up not giving the class. Brahmananda would walk out from his room, and one of us was giving class, and he was, didn't I tell Hari to give class? Then one day he got very firm about it. He said, listen, tomorrow morning, Hari Murari, you're giving class. So forth, so on. So, we all said, oh man, well, Hari, no problem. Hari also knew the philosophy. So it wasn't a question of, a fear of giving class because he was not philosophically capable. It was just, that was not his thing. He didn't speak in front of a lot of people and the whole thing. That was just a personality trait. So anyways, that next morning arises, we all go to Mangalarti, everything. And I think we saw Hari in the Mangalarti, And then, you know, we all went, did japa after that, after Tulsi Puja, we did japa. And then it was getting close to time for class. So we set up everything for the class. And I remember knocking on Hari's door and saying, hey, Hari Boo, probably like 10 minutes, you know. So I didn't get an answer, but I just thought, you know, he may be studying or whatever, so I just left it. So then it came time for class, and we still didn't see Hari. So I think I chanted Jai Radha Madhava. I said, well, I'll just chant Jai Radha Madhava, and by the time we finish, you know, Hari will probably come out hearing the end of Jai Radha Madhava. Hari didn't come out. So Brahmananda would always, he wouldn't come in the temple room, but his door from his own room opened to the temple room. So he opened his door and he asked, where's Hari? So, you know, well, Maharaj, we don't know. So I got up and I went back and knocked on Hari's door. No answer. So I opened Hari's door, and his bedding and all the things which were in the room, as I mentioned before, they were meticulously stacked up, but there was no Hari Murari. So I'm like, well, did he go? Because sometimes we used to go japa walking, right? So I said, did he go on japa walk and just try to avoid the class, or, you know, what? So I went back and told Brahman, he's not here. He said, go find him, right? So I'm thinking, okay, are we going to all go looking around, or should we just, you know, do whatever, you know, should we do the class, then find him, right? So then we went out, and as we're going out the front gate area, we had a gate and a door. We went out that door. Tahiro, our driver's pulling in, because there was a little place for parking the car or the van. So he pulls in, he gets out, and I said, Hari Bol Tahiro, did you see Hari Marai Babu? Oh, Hari? Yeah, I just took Hari to the airport. So I'm saying, oh boy, I didn't want to be the one to go back and tell Brahmananda this, right? Especially because the whole week prior to that, Hari had been going out preaching on a Friends of Krishna Club cultivation, and he would come back and say, oh, this guy's he's really developing. So I said, who is it, Hari? And it didn't like kick in at that time. But the guy who was cultivating was our travel agent. In other words, whenever we wanted to travel within Nigeria, or if Brahmananda was going to India, that was the travel agent guy we used. So Hari had been going down, giving him books and cultivating him and everything else. So nobody thought anything of it. But apparently Hari, you know, cultivated his way to a ticket back to the U.S., or whatever. And so Tahiro said, you know, no, I took him to the airport, you know, early this morning, right after Mangal Arati. And yeah, he's so then we thought about, you know, running out to the airport, but then we thought, well, what is that going to do? At this point, his flight is probably gone, everything else. So Brahmananda was kind of in shock. He didn't say anything. He just went in his room and shut the door, right? But then I'll tell another part of the story was that we later talked to Sanatan Goswami Prabhu, my god brother, and Sanatan recounted when Hari came back to America. It was in February. And he said that he was at the restaurant and it was really cold out. It was snowing and everything. And he said that he was looking up the block. There was a subway station up the block. Eastern Market subway station was up the block from the restaurant. And so he was looking and he saw someone, and, you know, Hari wore saffron cloth, dhoti and kurta, everything. So, and, you know, saffron cloth against the backdrop of everybody else stands out. So he looks down, he sees this saffron cloth coming, and he's thinking, well, you know, Maharaj is in his room. So who is this? So he gets closer, and it's Hari Murari in the middle of winter, snow and all, in a pair of flip-flops, and his dhoti and kurta with just this charter on, Hari Bol. So now he's telling us this story, and we were all laughing our hearts out because this was Hari Murari's nature, you know. He kind of was his own person. He's always been his own person. You know, sweet as could be and really great devotee, but, you know, he's his own person, right? So after that, it was, like I said, around February when this happened. And we had never gone to India. When Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj originally sent us, the original plan was for us to go to Mayapur Festival, then go to Africa. That didn't happen, as I mentioned in the volume 1. And so we were really excited. We had now developed the temple in Nigeria. It was really running. We had devotees coming, devotees joining. We had our Western contingent of devotees. Book distribution was going on very nicely. Sunday feast was going on very nicely. Outreach programs at home. So we thought we've done yeoman's work kind of. by the grace of Mahaprabhu and our Guru Parampara. And we really wanted to go and get enthused, and especially myself, you know, I had been there from that beginning point, like I said, and I was not burnt out because I loved preaching in Africa. So I was not burnt out, but I wanted a recharging, so to speak. And so I brought up the idea of going to India. My former wife had come at that time. She had also not been to India then, and I thought maybe we could go to India and then come back and either go to a new place, because the idea was once we establish one temple, we immediately go and establish another one in another country. So Brahmananda Prabhu wrote to Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. They mutually agreed, yes, you can go to India, but Brahmananda's caveat was, but you have to collect the money to go, right? So Brahmananda said, listen, I'll give you one of the vans. We had 2 vans at that point, and the Daihatsu. 2 drivers, Adams and Tahiro. And, you know, he says, you can take Tahiro, and you can take the van, and you and your wife, you can travel and collect your money to go to India by book distribution. So we said, okay, you know, it's another exciting adventure, and, you know, we'll be living out of the van and traveling and preaching. And we did have some contacts from our mailing list for Friends of Krishna and other places we could go and sometimes stay and stuff. So we compiled everything we needed. We had a bunch of books with us, and we headed out with Tahiro to go preaching to raise this money. We had 1 month pretty much from February to Gorpanim was going to be in March to raise the money and get our flight and everything else. So we went and we started going from state to state. I cannot remember a place. I remember we went to Port Harcourt. We had gone to Calabar. We had gone to Owerri. And in fact, in Owerri, I believe it was it Owerri or... Anyways, in one of those towns, let me tell one story first before we get there. Anyways, we generally would go into a town. We would set up in the middle of town at one of the markets, something, do our preaching, do our book distribution, buy some boga at the market, go back. In our van, we had a sterno stove, one of those camping stoves, and we would have some oil and we had some other things. So we would open up the back of the van and we had a little like pull-out table thing, and we'd set everything up and just cook. And, you know, that's how we were surviving. And we always had jerry cans full of water and everything else. So it was really exciting. It was like being on a perpetual camping trip and preaching. So it was like wonderful. So I remember one Ekadasi, we were preaching. I can't remember exactly where we were, but Tahiro pulled off the side of the road into like a little wooded area, and that's where we decided to spend the night. Somehow or another, we never thought about encountering any kind of danger. Brahmananda had mentioned many, some years before we had the temple and everything, when he was, no, not many years before, but when he was there, once he was in the van and he had gotten attempted robbery. But when they opened the van, they saw him and he jumped out. Brahmananda's used, they just decided to never mind, I guess, right? But we never encountered anything like that. We never encountered any armed robbers, and armed robbery in Nigeria can be serious. So serious that the robbers, when they were going to do a major armed robbery, I'm not talking about little snatching of chains and things like that, but when they were going to do a major armed robbery, they used to print flyers, and they would send the flyers around the neighborhood that they were going to rob and tell the people either set some things out for us or we'll come in and get it. That's how robberies were in Nigeria, right? So, but we never, and they never, ever, though they probably knew money was coming into the temple, they never robbed the temple, or even, you never saw anything even attempting like that. And I believe that's because there's a certain part of the spiritual culture in Africa as a whole, in Nigeria, that like, nah, not robbing religious places and so forth. So anyways, we pulled off into this little bush area, and it was Ekadasi that day. So I remember particularly we had bought plantain and coconut. We would break open the dried coconut and we'd fry that with peanuts and some raisins, and then we had plantain, and we had some kind of sabji or something. Anyway, we would share that with Tahiro, and we went ahead and tried to go to sleep. Now myself and my former wife, Brajalila, we would sleep in the van. She would sleep in the back section, I would sleep on the front, and then Tahiro would put his mat either outside the van or on top of the van. So, because we had a little ladder you could climb up there. So, we were sleeping like that for about an hour or something. But then around, I don't know, 9:30, something like that, the mosquitoes, it had just gotten so bad that it was intolerable. There was just going to be no way we could do this. So we took off and we drove, and we passed a school, and the school gate was open. So nobody was there. There was no guards there or anything. So we said, listen, let's just see what it is. So we drove in, we got down, and I remember first going into the restroom and just kind of washing my face with cold water and everything, because we've been bitten pretty bad by mosquitoes and everything. And then we went into the cafeteria area, and there were a bunch of tables and everything in there. So we just put bedding on each of the tables, and all three of us slept inside the cafeteria. We got up very early in the morning, as we normally did anyway. Went back in the bathroom, washed up. We couldn't shower everything, but washed up really well. Chanted Gayatri, everything. Left, got back in the van, and went on preaching. Next story is that we got to one town, and this is super interesting and something that's very pertinent to our Sangha today. So I cannot remember which city this was. It was Owerri maybe. But anyways, we had a contact in that city for a person who was like one of the members of parliament. So we were extremely happy. We were going to stay in a building for a change and everything. So we got there, and we were greeted by this very wonderful lady. Her husband was not there at the time. But she said, yes, you can be accommodated here and everything. And so we spoke to her for a little while. And she said, my son is a Hare Krishna. So we were thinking, wow, I wonder who this is. So I started naming the devotees we had in the Lagos temple, right? And said, no, my son, he's not here in Nigeria. He's in the UK. So I said, well, who is your son? She said, his name is Govinda Bhakata, right? So I remember we didn't get it all figured out at that time. It was later on after I got back that I wrote to Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, or perhaps it was on a phone call, because we used to call the States from time to time. And I asked about him, and Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj says, yes, I know him. He's a huge, very, potent devotee in the UK, because the first thing in my mind was, wow, his parents are, well-to-do, established parents here in this place, and if he comes and he's an experienced devotee, this would be great. And Bhakti Maharaj said, never going to happen. He's like one of the biggest collectors there, and there's nowhere in the world they're going to let him leave the UK and so forth. But anyway, that person was our Pujapad Srila Bhaktivedanta Ashram Maharaj. So that was our meeting of his parents in Nigeria before we met him years and years later. So anyway, that was a wonderful experience. We had a great experience. From there, we traveled to another place. So it's another story. And I'm wondering what my time is like here. I may be getting near time to end. I'm trying not to make these things go more than an hour. But anyway, we went to another town, and we began preaching there, and we were just selling mass amounts of books. And we were thinking, this is great. So all the people who were buying the books, they were all super interested. So, a lot of people buy books out of curiosity, but these people were buying the books as though they had some kind of experience with spirituality. And so I actually just asked one person, hey, what, there's a big, amount of people buying books and everything. He said, yeah, a lot of people here belong to the Rosicrucian order. So I was like, well, I heard about Rosicrucians, but I wasn't super clear on it. But apparently there was a huge Rosicrucian lodge there, and one of the chiefs of that area was a big Rosicrucian. And they all used to gather together and talk about all kinds of esoteric philosophies and stuff. So we asked, where can we meet him? So, they told us about him and everything else. So we got permission somehow or another to go and see him. And we drove and we met him, and we were talking to him and his wives again. And he invited us to spend the night and stay there at his house. So myself and former wife, we were looking around his place. He had a pretty large place, and we've been preaching to him and everything. So he took us to one area of his gardens, which was called the Juju Grove. So now, in my experience back in America, in my studies in traditional African religions and bata drumming and, Lukumi, Santari, all these things, I kind of knew about the Orisha and all these kind of things. So he showed me, because we end up speaking about it, he showed me his shrines that were there within the compound. And so I remember Brother Leela was not super comfortable looking at all these things, and then now we're going to be spending the night here. And the room we had was in one section of the building, and, we were thinking, yeah, there's all these different kind of, spirits and so forth and so on that were around. So anyway, long story short, we did end up spending the night there, and he was a great host. He bought a bunch of books himself, because he not only bought for himself, but he bought to put into the Rosicrucian library and everything else. So, just great preaching adventures. I think I'm going to call it here, because I think it's getting a little bit late. I'll try to pick up from this place on the next go round. I just wanted to show a couple of other pictures, some of the early pictures from the preaching there. Our Pujapachula Bhaktivedanta Santa Maharaj, as I mentioned, was a great cook. So here's a picture of him back at that time, cooking in the temple there in Ilupeju, perhaps cooking for the Sunday feast or something. And he was featured in one of the articles in the magazines, because it was about preparing prasadam. And so all these things you see, which are written upside down, by the way, these are all recipes for different kinds of meals that used to be cooked. Prasad meals we used to cook. And there was a picture of Bhakta Martin at the time, who was in there doing a lot of the cooking. All right, I think we're going to end it here. I think I'll pick up and explain a little more about the traveling preaching that myself and Brother Leela did when we were trying to raise our money to go to India, and some of that. So anyways, Dandavats, I hope I don't end up erasing my mistake, this section 3, but Dandavat Pranam devotees, I will come out with section 4 as soon as I can. And my Dandavat Pranam. Vancha kalpaturvishcha kripa sindhavevacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.